Mom left everything to me. You have 2 days. The sentence landed in the room without weight, without heat. It was delivered the way someone might read a grocery list. Calm, final, practiced. Laura Miller stood near the living room window, her black coat still buttoned. She'd not taken it off since the funeral. The house smelled faintly of furniture polish and the soup she had reheated the night before, untouched. Outside, the lawn looked exactly the same as it had every other morning. Nothing in the world appeared to have shifted. Her husband sat on the sofa with a manila envelope resting neatly on his knee. He did not look up when he spoke. His eyes stayed on the papers, as if the words were already written there and he was simply reciting them. He repeated himself, slower this time, as though clarity were the problem. The house. His now. 2 days. Enough time, in his mind, to pack up a life. Laura did not raise her voice. She did not ask a question. Her body reacted before her thoughts did. A slight tightening in her chest, a dull pressure behind her eyes. 30 years of routine training her to stay composed, to listen first, to keep things from becoming unpleasant. She glanced at the envelope. Legal documents, official, clean. The kind of paper that carried authority without emotion. Her sister-in-law stood near the doorway, arms folded, posture upright. She spoke without stepping forward. It's all been reviewed. There's nothing to contest. Nothing to contest. Laura noticed how carefully that sentence avoided saying why. She had lived in this house for nearly 3 decades. She had memorized the sound of the floorboard that creaked near the kitchen. She knew which window stuck in winter and how to coax it open. She had slept lightly for years, listening for her mother-in-law's breathing down the hall, ready to rise at the smallest change in rhythm. None of that came up. Instead, the conversation stayed narrow. Ownership, deadlines, logistics. Her husband finally looked at her then. His expression was not cruel. It was contained, almost relieved, as if a long-delayed task were finally being completed. "I don't want this to get difficult," he said. Laura nodded once. The motion surprised even her. It felt automatic, like agreeing to a change in appointment time. Somewhere inside, a quieter part of her noticed something odd. He was not negotiating. People who expected resistance explained themselves. He did not. He spoke like someone who already knew the outcome. She asked only one question. Her voice sounded steady, distant, as though it belonged to someone else. "When did you decide this?" He hesitated, just long enough. "After the will was read," he said. But Laura saw it then, the way his hand tightened on the envelope, the way his shoulders remained relaxed, unbothered. This was not new information being processed. This was a plan being executed. Her sister-in-law cleared her throat. "We can help arrange a short-term stay somewhere," she offered, already framing Laura as a temporary problem to be solved. Laura looked around the room one last time. The framed photos. The lamp she had chosen because it gave soft light in the evenings. Her mother-in-law's chair, positioned carefully near the window so she could watch the street. No one mentioned gratitude. No one acknowledged time. She felt no urge to plead, no impulse to remind them of years spent here, of medication schedules memorized, of holidays hosted, of quiet loyalty. Those arguments belonged to a different kind of story. This one was ending without discussion. She went to the hallway closet and took down her coat hook key. The small metal sound echoed louder than it should have. When she returned, both of them were waiting, silent, as if afraid a word might complicate things. "I'll leave today," Laura said. Her husband exhaled, almost imperceptibly. Relief crossed his face before he caught it. As she stepped outside, the door closing behind her with a final, careful click, Laura realized something she could not yet name. The calm in that room had not come from confidence. It had come from preparation. The pen hovered above the line longer than it should have. The front desk clerk waited, eyes polite, unreadable. Laura could feel the weight of the moment settling into her wrist. "Last name?" the clerk asked gently. Laura looked down at the form. She had written Laura without hesitation. The second line remained blank. For more than 30 years, she had filled it in without thought. The name had felt permanent, reliable. Tonight, it felt provisional. She wrote it anyway, slowly, each letter deliberate. When she handed the clipboard back, her fingers trembled slightly, though she did not know why. The clerk offered a practiced smile and slid a room key across the counter. "Second floor, end of the hall." The motel smelled of carpet cleaner and old air. The lighting was dim, yellowed, meant to soften everything it touched. Laura dragged her small suitcase down the corridor, the wheels clicking unevenly over seams in the floor. Inside the room, she placed the bag on the bed and stood still. The space was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No familiar sounds. No breathing from the next room. No ticking clock she recognized. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her bag. At the top was a framed wedding photograph wrapped in a towel. Beneath it, a plastic pill organizer. Morning, evening, night. Her mother-in-law's careful system, memorized down to the hour. The pairing made her chest tighten. She had not packed intentionally. She had grabbed what was closest, proof of what she had been, evidence of what she had done. Laura lay back on the bed, fully dressed. The ceiling above her was stained with a faint watermark, shaped vaguely like a cloud. She stared at it until her eyes burned. She thought about the years spent explaining her role to others. "I don't work outside the home. I take care of his mother. It's easier this way." The explanations had always felt sufficient. No one had questioned her further. No one, including her. Sometime after midnight, she sat up and reached for her phone. There were no missed calls, no messages. The absence felt deliberate. She scrolled through old photos, holidays, birthdays. Her face was present in all of them, usually just off to the side, holding something, standing behind someone. She noticed how rarely she appeared alone. At dawn, Laura stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection under harsh fluorescent light. The woman looking back at her seemed unchanged. Same posture, same careful expression. Yet something had shifted. She was not angry. She was uncertain. And uncertainty, she realized, was far more dangerous to a life built on assumption. She sat back on the bed as the first hint of morning light crept through the thin curtains. For the first time, she considered a question she had never asked before. Not, "Where will I go?" but, "Who was I allowed to be?" The phone rang just after 8 in the morning. Laura was sitting at the small motel desk, a paper cup of coffee cooling beside her. She had not slept. She had watched the sky lighten, minute by minute, as if waiting for something to arrive. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. She let it ring once, then twice. On the third ring, she answered. The woman's voice was calm, measured, older than Laura had expected. There was no hesitation, no emotional clearing of the throat. She said Laura's name carefully, as if confirming it belonged to the right person. "I didn't attend the service," the woman said. "I thought it would be unkind." Laura's first thought was simple. An affair. The idea fit neatly into everything else. Painful, but familiar. A story she could understand. "I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because you deserve to know." "I don't want anything from you," the woman continued. "I'm not angry. I'm not asking questions." Laura said nothing. She felt her body go still, the way it used to when she waited for medical instructions. The woman explained without embellishment. Dates, a courthouse, joint tax filings that had never stopped, a marriage that had been paused in practice, but never ended on paper. Laura listened, her free hand resting flat against the desk. The wood felt cool, grounding. So, you're saying... Laura began, then stopped. I'm saying I'm still legally married to him, the woman replied. I always have been. There was no accusation in the sentence, no triumph, just a statement of fact. Laura waited for anger to arrive. It didn't. Instead, a strange emptiness opened. Not betrayal, not even shock. Something quieter. Exclusion. The woman paused, as if allowing space for the information to settle. I didn't know about you at first, she added. When I did, I assumed the paperwork had been handled. Laura thought of all the times she had been reassured. I took care of it. There's nothing to worry about. Trust me. The woman's voice softened, just slightly. When I saw the obituary, I realized it hadn't. The call ended without ceremony. No promises to stay in touch, no apologies. The woman had delivered what she came to deliver. Laura set the phone down and stared at it, as if it might ring again and correct itself. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, cars moved along the road. People started their days. Everything continued, unaware. She understood then that this was not a secret being revealed. It was a life being reclassified. She had not been deceived in the way movies described. There had been no dramatic double life, no sudden disappearance. There had simply been a truth she was never invited into. Laura returned to the desk and opened her notebook. She wrote one sentence, slowly. I was not his wife. The words looked unreal on the page, yet they carried a strange clarity. For the first time since the funeral, Laura felt something settle, not relief, not grief, recognition. The warning had never been loud. Laura drove across town in the late afternoon, the sun sitting low and pale behind a thin layer of clouds. The address had been written on a scrap of paper, handed to her without ceremony. A friend from church, someone who had known Helen for years. The house was modest and carefully kept. Wind chimes hung near the front door, moving slightly in the breeze. When the door opened, the woman who greeted Laura looked at her with recognition, not surprise. I wondered when you might come, she said. They sat at a small kitchen table. Tea was poured. The conversation began where it needed to, not where it was polite. Helen worried about you, the woman said. Not in the way people usually worry. Laura waited. She used to say he was a good man, who avoided hard truths. The sentence settled between them. Laura had heard versions of it before. At the time, it had sounded like a mother's gentle excuse. She started seeing a lawyer a few years ago, the woman continued. Quietly. She didn't want anyone thinking she was stirring trouble. Laura's fingers tightened around her cup. The tea had gone untouched. She said if things stayed as they were, you would be the one left without protection. The word struck Laura harder than any accusation could have. Protection. She thought of how Helen had insisted on keeping certain folders in a locked drawer, how she had corrected small details whenever documents were mentioned, how she had once said, almost casually, "Make sure your name is written clearly." At the time, Laura had smiled and nodded. The woman stood and returned with a thin envelope. It had been left with her for safekeeping. Just in case, Helen had said. Laura did not open it yet. She rested her palm on the paper, feeling the faint ridge of its contents. She didn't want to expose him, the woman added, but she didn't want you erased. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Life continued in ordinary sounds. Laura finally opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in careful handwriting. Some truths cannot be spoken out loud. Some must be prepared for. There was no explanation, no apology, just intention. Laura folded the paper slowly. For the first time since the phone call, she felt something shift. She had not been foolish. She had been shielded. The silence that once felt like neglect revealed itself as something else entirely. Preparation. As she left the house, Laura understood that the truth had not appeared suddenly. It had been waiting. The paper did not look important. It was a single page, no seal that caught the eye, no dramatic language, just standard formatting, clean margins, and a few carefully placed paragraphs, the kind of document people rarely read twice. Laura sat across from the attorney in a quiet office with beige walls and a narrow window. Outside, traffic moved steadily, indifferent to what was being decided inside. The man's voice was even, practiced. He did not soften the words. The first marriage was never legally dissolved, he said. Because of that, the second marriage was void from the start. The attorney slid the paper toward her. This confirms it. She looked down. Names, dates, jurisdiction, everything aligned too neatly. There was no space for interpretation, no margin for hope. She thought of anniversaries celebrated, cards written, forms filled out under the assumption that someone else had handled the details. Handled. The word echoed. For legal purposes, the attorney continued, you were never his spouse. Laura expected the floor to drop. Instead, she felt oddly steady, as if a structure that had been unsound for years had finally been removed. What about the house? She asked. The attorney paused. The inheritance filings list him as a widower, he said. That statement is false. He explained what followed. Suspended transfers, frozen accounts, an automatic review triggered by inconsistency. Laura listened. This was not punishment. It was correction. And his sister? She asked. She signed as a witness, the attorney replied. That carries responsibility. Laura folded her hands in her lap. She did not feel victorious, only clear. 30 years had not vanished. They had simply lost their label. Care did not require a certificate. Devotion did not need a stamp. But lies, she now understood, always left a record. The attorney leaned back slightly. Your mother-in-law anticipated this, he said. She arranged her affairs so the truth would surface without you having to fight. Laura absorbed that in silence. As she left the office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. People hurried past her, carrying groceries, checking phones, living inside assumptions of their own. Laura walked slowly. For the first time since the funeral, she was no longer losing something. She was standing on what remained. The first consequence was silence. Then everything stopped moving. 2 days after Laura left the house, the attorney's office called her back. Not with emotion, not with encouragement, with a simple update. The transfer has been flagged, he said. Laura stood in the motel parking lot, phone pressed to her ear, watching a man load suitcases into the trunk of a car. The normalcy of the scene felt almost insulting. What does that mean? She asked. It means the process can't continue as filed, the attorney replied, because the filing includes false statements. Laura did not correct him. She did not offer alternative wording. False was false. The system moved in steps, like a machine noticing grit in its gears. First, a request for clarification. Then an automatic hold. The bank accounts connected to the estate were frozen. The pending paperwork on the house could not be recorded. The small line of credit Helen had used for medical equipment was suspended until the estate was reviewed. It was not dramatic. It was procedural, and because it was procedural, it could not be negotiated with charm or explained away with a story. Laura returned to the office later that week. The attorney had a second file open now, thicker, more formal. He pointed to a section on one of the forms. He listed himself as the surviving spouse, he said. He isn't. He also listed himself as unmarried at the time of the second marriage. Laura pictured Robert's handwriting, his careful pen strokes, the way he signed things with confidence. How long will this take? She asked. As long as it takes to correct the record, the attorney replied. He turned another page. His sister signed as a witness on the inheritance documents. She affirmed the information. Laura remembered Marilyn's face in the living room, the folded arms, the certainty, nothing to contest. Those words returned now, stripped of their calm. "What happens to her?" Laura asked. The attorney spoke the way professionals speak when they refuse to sensationalize. "She may be asked to explain her role. There can be penalties. It depends on what investigators determine she knew and when." Investigators. Laura had never expected that word to enter her life. She left the office and drove past the old church. Cars filled the lot for a midweek meeting. People who had hugged her after the funeral were inside that building right now, holding coffee cups, making plans, assuming the world worked the way it always had. Laura parked across the street and sat for a moment with the engine off. She did not feel like going in, not because she was ashamed, because she could already sense what was coming. A story did not need proof to spread. It only needed an opening. By the weekend, Robert's name appeared on the agenda of a committee meeting, quietly removed from a role he had held for years. No announcement was made, no public accusation, just a gap where his authority had been. Marilyn stopped answering calls. Then, early Monday morning, Laura received a short message from the attorney. "They've requested additional records." It read, "Tax filings, marriage certificates, prior addresses, anything that clarifies the timeline." The timeline. Laura thought of her own years as if they were suddenly a sequence to be verified. She drove back to the house once, not to enter, but to stand at the end of the driveway. The curtains were drawn, the porch light was off. The place looked sealed. A neighbor walked past with a dog and avoided her eyes. It wasn't hostility. It was distance. Laura realized then what Robert had not understood. He had believed that getting rid of her would reset his life. But the record did not care about what he wanted. The record cared about what was true, and now truth was beginning to speak in official language. Slow, firm, and impossible to talk over. No one confronted him. That was the part he didn't anticipate. By the middle of the week, the story no longer belonged to documents. It moved on its own now, carried in pauses, glances, and quiet adjustments. Laura noticed it first in small ways. A message from a woman she had known for years that never came. A calendar. Invite that disappeared without explanation. A committee roster updated online, one familiar name missing. Robert's name. The change was subtle enough that it could be denied. But it was consistent. Laura stopped by the grocery store she had gone to for decades. The cashier smiled the same way she always had, but the conversation ended sooner. No comment about the weather. No question about how she was holding up. It wasn't cruelty. It was caution. People who valued order did not want to be seen near disorder. At church, his seat remained empty, not because he was banned, because he wasn't invited. Laura sat near the back one morning, unnoticed. She listened to the hymns and recognized how easily routines adapted, how quickly absence could become normal. She saw Marilyn once, across a parking lot. Her sister-in-law's posture was different now, shoulders slightly hunched, phone pressed tightly to her ear. She did not wave. Laura felt no urge to approach. The community did what it always did when certainty collapsed. It created distance, not loudly, efficiently. By Friday, Robert had been removed from 2 volunteer boards. The announcements were phrased neutrally. Term completed. Scheduling conflicts. Nothing inaccurate. Nothing revealing. At a cafe, Laura overheard a fragment of conversation. Not names, just tone. "I didn't realize it was like that." Neither had she. What spread wasn't outrage. It was unease. And unease made people cautious. Laura understood then why Robert had spoken so calmly in the living room. He had believed control meant silence. He had believed if no one raised their voice, nothing would fall apart. He had underestimated how quickly people recalculated trust. One afternoon, Laura received a message from an old acquaintance. It was short, carefully worded. "I hope you're okay. I'm sorry I didn't see more." Laura read it twice. It was not an apology. It was an admission. That evening, she walked past the house one last time. Lights were on now, but the windows reflected nothing back at her. She kept walking. The community had not chosen her side. It had chosen distance. And distance, she realized, could dismantle a life more thoroughly than accusation ever could. He arrived without warning, and that was how she knew it mattered to him. It was late afternoon when Laura heard the knock. Not urgent, not hesitant, controlled. She was staying in a small rental now, a place that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and unfamiliar detergent. She did not open the door immediately. She stood in the narrow hallway and waited until the sound came again. When she did open it, Robert was standing a step back, hands at his sides, posture practiced. "I just want to talk," he said. Laura stepped aside without answering. She did not offer him a seat. He chose the chair near the window, the one that faced the street. He looked around as if taking inventory. Smaller space, fewer traces of history. "They're asking questions," he began. "About paperwork, about things from years ago." Laura nodded once. She had expected this. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. His voice stayed even, almost reasonable. There weren't a lot of good options back then. Laura studied his face. The familiar expressions were all there: concern, justification, the absence of apology. "You could have told me," she said. It was the first time she had spoken since he arrived. Her voice was quiet, unchallenging. He shook his head. "You wouldn't have understood." The sentence hung between them. Laura felt something settle inside her. Not anger, resolution. "This was easier," he continued, "keeping things the way they were." She understood then that he believed this explanation should be sufficient. That comfort, in his mind, excused omission. "I didn't lose anything," Laura said. "I was never included." He looked at her sharply, as if she had shifted the ground beneath him. "I'm asking you not to make this worse," he said. She met his eyes. For the first time in years, she did not soften her expression. "I didn't make it," she replied. "I noticed it." The room grew quiet. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing over pavement. He stood. "So this is it?" Laura considered the question. "This ended a long time ago," she said. "I'm just leaving now." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Whatever he had come prepared to say no longer fit. When the door closed behind him, Laura locked it without hesitation. She stood still for a moment, then exhaled slowly. This time, the silence felt earned. The letter arrived after everything else had stopped moving. It was forwarded from an old address, the envelope creased from handling. Laura recognized the handwriting immediately. Careful, slightly slanted, familiar in a way that no longer hurt. She opened it at the kitchen table of her rental, the late morning light spreading across the surface. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. Ordinary sounds, a world continuing. The note was short. "Whether the law ever called you my daughter-in-law was never the point. I saw how you stayed. I know what you gave." Laura read it once, then again. There was no attempt to correct the past, no instruction, just acknowledgement. She folded the paper and placed it in a drawer with a few other things she had chosen to keep, not out of obligation, out of clarity. In the weeks that followed, the processes concluded quietly. Records were amended, roles reassigned, explanations offered where required, none where they weren't. Robert did not call again. Marilyn's name appeared once more in a public notice, attached to a fine and a compliance requirement. No commentary followed. The community moved on, as it always did. Laura changed her address officially. She updated her information where it mattered. At each counter, On each form, she stated her name without pause. It felt lighter every time. She took a part-time position assisting at a care center. Nothing dramatic, just work that required attention and steadiness. People learned her name quickly, not as someone's wife, not as someone's caregiver by default, just as herself. One afternoon, she stood in front of a mirror, smoothing the collar of her coat. She saw the same woman she had always been, but this time she understood the difference. She had not lost a marriage. She had stepped out of a story that was never legally hers. What remained was not emptiness, but space. And in that space, Laura Miller stood, unattached, acknowledged, and whole. The story did not end with restitution. It ended with authorship. She kept her name. She kept her life.